again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. I got a great topic for you today, and a long one, so let's see how close I can get to remembering it. Serious. Redditors, what's the creepiest thing that has ever happened to you that you can't tell someone else because they wouldn't believe you? Whew. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was a child, I was running around the house. I think I was home alone. My mom had run next door to the neighbor. My dad was at work. I heard the door open and close. Mom? No answer. I heard footsteps downstairs that were too heavy for my mom. I freaked out and decided I needed to hide. I was next to the laundry room, so I ran in there and buried myself in a pile of dirty clothes. The footsteps came up the stairs. I heard the footsteps go down the hallway to my sister's bedroom, then mine, then my parents' room. Then the steps came to the laundry room. I heard heavy breathing. They stood there. It felt like forever. Then they left. I heard the front door open and close again, but I was paralyzed in fear. I stayed there, under the dirty clothes, until my mother came home and called my name. She thought it was all in my head when I told her what happened. I was out for a walk early one morning in a forest preserve that's usually pretty empty. I start coming around a corner, and I can see a car that's parked in the grass just outside of the parking lot. I think it's strange, but keep on walking. I'm probably like 50 feet from the car now, and suddenly the trunk pops open. The car alarm starts going off, and the driver's side door opens. I'm coming from the passenger side and can't see the driver, but I get a bad feeling about the situation. I still keep walking on the path and come around where I can see the driver's side of the car. A guy is sitting in the car driver's seat and starts to wave me over to him. He throws up his hands and says, "I'm not sure what's going on. Could you help me?" I tell him nah, he's on his own, without breaking my stride, and keep moving. He throws his hands up again and turns off the car alarm and gets out and shuts the trunk, and then gets in and drives away. I'm creeped out, so once he's out of sight, I double back and walk the opposite way just to be safe. I walk back probably like the 30 minutes it takes to get to the lot where I parked my car. When I'm getting close, I hear the car alarm going off again. I'm freaking out now, but didn't want to walk back into the woods again, so I keep going to the parking lot. When I get there, that same car is parked with its trunk open, car alarm going off, and driver's door open. The guy is already talking to someone else in the parking lot. He sees me come into the lot, looks at me for a minute, then shuts off the car alarm, closes the trunk, and drives away again. I just booked it to my car and called the park rangers, but they didn't believe anything was weird about it. I'm like 90% sure that dude was trying to kidnap someone. I drove an old SUV back in college. After school, I drove home, which is about a 30-minute drive. I was getting dressed at home when the car alarm went off, so I rushed out and discovered the car door open with the radio head unit and all speakers gone. I was thinking this guy works fast, reported it to the police, and after a couple of weeks, they found the thief and asked me to go to the police station. At the police station, I was asked a few questions, and the officer told me I had to hear something from the thief. When I confronted him, he told me that he was able to get into my car at the car park near my school, and I unexpectedly arrived, so he dove and lay flat in the third row. So I was driving home with an unknown passenger all the time. When I arrived home and locked the car, that was the time he removed the items, and when he opened the door, that's when the alarm triggered. Always check the back seat. I know it sounds silly, and of course I do. Always check the back seat. This didn't happen to me, but to my parents. My mom, going off the deep end of a crazy train, isn't that out of character, but my dad doesn't do that ever, and he swears the story is legit. When I was around 2ish, my mom woke up from a nightmare, and she woke my dad up. He tried going back to sleep, and she told him not to because his mom was going to call soon because, not using their name, had been decapitated in some kind of accident. My dad, of course, thought this was nonsense, but my mom was hysterical over it, so he couldn't sleep. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the phone was ringing. It was his mom, letting him know that his friend and the friend's little brother's girlfriend had both died in a car crash coming home from a party about 3 miles away from us. My dad's mom and their family were very close, and my grandma, my dad's mom, shouldn't have to explain, but it's getting a bit all over the place, and the mother from that family were lifelong friends and died just 6 months or so apart. Anyway, later learned that my dad's friend had been decapitated when he lost control of his ragtop Camaro, hit a tree, flipped the car upside down, and slid a ways on down the road. Neither he nor his younger brother's girlfriend were wearing seatbelts. This would have been back in maybe 1981-ish. One night when I was 15, I stayed over at my buddy's house. His parents were gone, and his older brother was looking after us. When we went to bed, the house was quiet and dark. I could barely see his bedroom door open slightly, and I assumed it was my buddy's brother checking in on us. But then I realized that this person looking in on us was wearing glasses, and my friend's brother did not. There was no one else in the house, and I could not figure out who this person was. I was frozen in fear just staring at this figure looking in on us when my buddy, who was in another bed on the other side of the room, started screaming at the top of his lungs. I had never heard a more terrifying sound, and my heart just dropped out of my chest. The person looking at us quickly backed out of the door and closed quietly. A few seconds later, we saw the light come on in the hallway, and my friend's brother flew open the door asking what was wrong. We both started yelling that someone was just there. The brother grabbed a baseball bat from his room and started searching the house. We checked the front and back doors and garage, but they were all locked. All the windows were closed. He looked in every closet and under the beds. Needless to say, we spent the rest of the night in his room. None of us could sleep, so we just stayed up all night talking. It was one of the most terrifying but also best nights of my life. Several years back, on a bright winter afternoon, I decided to take my nephew, then 7, my son, then 3, and my dog on a short hike at the local park. We were walking through the woods on a trail when my dog started barking. I look over and see a man standing in the woods about 50 feet away facing us. I couldn't see his face because he had one of those fur-lined hoods on, so, with the distance and the shadows from the trees and his hood, from my perspective, there was nothing but a black hole where his face should be. I gave an awkward wave, but he remained motionless, and I had a weird feeling, so I decided to just keep moving and making our way back to the car. I felt like we were being watched, so I looked back a few minutes later, and the man was still just standing in the woods. But I knew he had moved because he was still about 50 feet away, and we had walked quite a ways. My dog was growling, and the kids and I were starting to get creeped out. We keep moving, and I suddenly hear the sound of fast, heavy footsteps in the snow. I look back again, and this time, I caught the guy running in our direction. But he stopped as soon as I saw him and went back to just staring motionlessly from afar, now closer than he was before. My dog was going nuts at this point, and my mind was racing with possibilities, so I discreetly gave my nephew my phone and quietly told him that if anything happened, that he needed to take his cousin and run as fast as they could to the car and call for help. I figured if anything, the dog and I could at least hold the guy off long enough for the kids to get away. I think my dog may have scared him off because he ended up turning around and going in the opposite direction. I've never really told anyone because I don't want to come off as being dramatic. When I was about 12, my family moved from a small house into an apartment for several months while waiting for construction on our new home to be completed. It was a huge apartment complex, but at the end of a long dead-end road, and it bordered a large, swampy, marshy area. Early one morning before school, I went outside to collect leaves from the marsh for a science project. I didn't actually go into the marsh, and I was never out of sight of my building, but I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I started walking back to my apartment. There was one building between me and my building, though. I could still see my building. I saw a man in that direction as me, but at the opposite end of this long building, and he was looking my direction. So, instead of continuing to my building, I went in the door at the end of the building closest to me. There was a hallway that passed through, but I stood in the hallway for a long time before going out the other side. The man was standing at the corner, watching for me, like he already knew I didn't live there. He laughed when he saw me come out, and as I started for my building, he was heading towards me. I made it to the door of my building, with half the yard still between us, and he said, "I'll see you later, sweetie." My stepmom and dad insisted I was imagining it. My dad was a police officer in the city, though, and when I was older and could ride along with him, he would talk about how awful those apartments were and how many registered DE offenders lived there and how much he hated all going on there. But he still denied my story ever happened. In my 20s, I used to see a man. He was always in my peripheral and never in direct line of sight. I'd see him at work or at the store while buying groceries, always public places. Every time I'd try to look at him, he'd disappear. This went on for many years to the point where I just ignored him being there. I never felt like he was bad or evil. He'd just stand there looking at me. Finally, one day I was at home getting something out of my car, and I caught a glimpse of him standing in the street in front of my house. I kept him in my peripheral, and I remember saying, "I don't know what you want, but you're not welcome here. He was gone, and I've only seen him maybe twice since. I'm 43 now, and this freaks me out typing this. I mean, from reading it, it almost sounds like some type of possible schizoaffective or some type of hallucination, but if it went away, great. I don't know, maybe it was an imaginary friend that hung out for quite a while. I had a Furby when the craze was happening, and you could teach it to say a lot of things or play games. I was playing peekaboo with it. All it did was close its eyes and then say peekaboo when it opened them a few seconds later. It started to say something, but it made a distorted sound like a battery was dying. You know when an electronic is on fire in the movies and the audio sounds all messed up? Kind of like that. It closed its eyes, and then no response for like 5 minutes. I messed around with it and just thought, hey, the battery's dead, I guess. I got up to get my mom, and as soon as I touched the doorknob, the Furby laughed and said, "I got you." Scared the shit out of me. It never did that again either. A lot of creepy shit happened in that house I grew up in. When I was in college, in a not great area, I lived in a building where you had to briefly go outside after parking in the garage to access the locked door to the stairwell. There were 2 stairwells, one on either side of the quite long garage. The garage had one metal mesh door that lifted so you could drive in, but it was totally see-through. One night I'm getting home late and grabbing all my crap from the car after parking, and then turned to see this massive dude like 6'6" or 6'7" range, in a hat and trench coat, standing right up against the mesh garage door in the dead center, staring straight at me. I'm in the garage, he's outside, but he's directly in the path to the locked stairwell. I don't want to show fear, so I take my time assembling all my stuff, and several minutes later, turn around and he has not moved, still silently staring. I walk over to the bank of mailboxes, which is out of his line of sight, to form a plan. I wait another few minutes and can hear him breathing. Then I got my keycard and took off running to the other end of the garage to get to the locked stairwell on that side. Dear reader, I just about shit myself when I heard heavy footsteps come pounding around the side of the building to the stairwell I was aiming for. Thank heavens I was able to unlock the door quickly, bust in, and slam it behind me. Never saw him again, but it was clear he figured out my plan and knew where the other stairwell was. I still get chills to this day when I think about what could have happened. I don't remember this, but it involves me. I would have been maybe a year old. I was asleep in the nursery and my parents were awake in bed, talking before going to sleep. When all of a sudden, they heard an adult voice loudly go, "Shh," from the nursery. They both bolted up out of bed and rushed into the nursery to find me awake, but thankfully alone. They never told anyone because who would believe it? There was also an incident with my ma around the same time. My dad had just gotten up at like 5 a.m. to go to work, and she was in bed, deciding whether to get up or sleep a bit more. She decided to get up, and as she stepped out of the bed, someone reached out from under the bed and grabbed her foot hard. She immediately pulled herself back up on the bed and was frozen there in fear for some time, waiting for someone to speak, make the bed move, start crawling out from under whatever. Eventually, she flew out the door, grabbed me, and then a weapon. But when she worked up the courage to go back to their room and look, there was of course no one there. Again, my parents never told anyone because it sounds crazy. I tend to not believe in ghosts or spirits, but these are freaky stories. I wonder if more people are freaked out by under-the-bed type monsters or things grabbing them or stuff like that. How do you feel about that? Do you worry about something being under the bed as an adult? Me and my cross-country team went to Yosemite about 17 years back now. The girls and boys slept in 2 big separate tents. I didn't know the sleeping accommodations prior to the trip, so my grandma got me a little tent of my own. There were quite a few people in the area, so it's not like we were isolated or anything like that. I've never slept well even in my younger years, and quite a few things happened during our 1-week stay. One being a bear walking by my tent, another being the sound of a woman screaming. The girls in the tents heard it too. But one night in particular, I heard some splashing and rustling in the lake we were camping by. I figure it's another bear or some shit. So I get my flashlight to see what it may be. Kind of unsafe idea maybe now that I think of it. I point it in the direction of the sound, and I see what looks like a person, but not quite a person. No clothes on, but it was small, but not built like a kid. They ran behind the trees. I go immediately back into my tent. Didn't see anything else like that the rest of the trip. One night when I was about 13, I was doing a weekend visit with my dad. You know, the kid of divorced parents. In the middle of the night, we get a phone call, which I knew a call in the middle of the night was never a good thing. My dad answered it and heard him whispering, and I knew this was not good news. It was at this point I noticed that there were red and blue cop lights whirling around from the window. The next thing I know, my dad comes into my room I share with my sisters. The weird thing was, he was squatting down low. He saw I was awake. Since I was the oldest, my dad told me what was going on. He whispered, "I need you to wake up your sisters and keep them calm." That was the police. There's a man out on the street with a gun, and we're being evacuated. At this point, my heart was racing. I remember it was pounding in my ears. It was beating so hard. The cops had told us to leave our lights off, stay away from the windows, and stay low. So I helped my dad wake my two younger sisters. We played it all off as a game, as we stayed near the floor and put on our winter boots and coats. It was below freezing out. The next part was the hardest part. We kept it vague on what was going on with my sisters because we had to go out the back and down 2 flights of outdoor stairs as quietly as we could. When we went out the door, I was terrified. Being in the open felt 10 times worse. My mind started imagining how bad it would hurt to get shot before I died. What if I had to watch my sisters or my dad get shot? Yet, I had to not let any of that show so my sisters wouldn't be as scared as me. We meet the cops at the bottom of the stairs. They told us to leave the area on foot. My dad asked where. They shrugged, so we went to a 24-hour burger place a few blocks away. After we got a ways away, I felt so relieved. So we sat in that burger joint drinking cocoa and sleeping on the benches with a few other evacuees. It was hours. The long story short, a crazy methed out guy with a gun was standing in front of my dad's house on the street. We had to be evacuated, sat in a burger joint for 4+ hours, and I experienced my first existential crisis at 13.